I was asked to talk about MapMaker, the story of maps. And after a little bit of discussion with Kamya, I decided to change the title. Um, so I had the pleasure of meeting Nandan while I was building MapMaker in 2010, I think, right, when he was building Aadhaar. And the reason I use these words is technology is actually 10% of the journey. Right? To me, technology is actually the easy part. Like, it's not obvious, but it is still 10% of the work. 90% of the work is somewhere else, and a lot of that work involves, this word we use in India called sacrifice. The Indian name for that is yajna, and what that means is you have to let go of your ego to bring success and to bring change at scale. And inclusion in the Indian policy parlance means how do we make the world work for all 8 billion of us? India is responsible for 1.4 billion, but how do we make the world work for all 8 billion of us? Right? That's the challenge. Right? And I'm not an expert, but I will walk you through my own journey using examples of platforms that I have been involved in. Um, yeah, yeah. Ah, it went to the bottom. Actually, the presentation is all the way at the bottom. Can you move to the top? Sorry about this. All the way to the top. How many engineers does it take to operate slides? Um, so this is a picture that we see all across the global south, if you call it. You have people like us, and then people like them. This us versus them continues, right? And the ratio is roughly 5%, 95%, right? And the challenge is a world that serves all 8 billion of us, right? How do we get there? Um, and the reason we are having this conversation is the current belief is that digital is probably the only way to get there, right? It is not like people have not wanted this for the last 100 years at least, or 70 years, but we have not been successful. And Ford Foundation recently, about 5 years ago, declared that everything they have done for the last 50 years has failed, because I think we as in the world tried it the physical way, and a lot of the problems that need to be solved are information problems. They are not material problems. So there is this myth that people are not capable, people don't know what to do, and we have to help them. And I don't need to preach to all of you. If you really understand people, people are highly capable. We don't need to help them, we need to get out of the way. And digital is probably the fastest way to get out of the way, right? So I use this as a, so this is a picture from a telescope. It's an infrared picture which has been colorized. If you look at space, it looks dark, but if you look very closely, it's full of light. So a lot of knowledge is dark, and what Aadhaar and UPI and all of them are doing is actually making dark knowledge lit up, right? So this is just a picture of India. You can redraw this picture for whichever part of the world you're from. And when I stare at India, I stare at a $10 trillion problem, right? Roughly, these are the services that the Constitution of India has said we will provide Not that we want to, it's not me. The Constitution of India has said we will provide this to our people. We will provide a world-class education for free. We will provide world-class healthcare. We will provide financial services. We will provide law and order, and so on and so forth. And if you take what it takes to provide that, the lowest cost Western analog, the number adds up to roughly $10 trillion, right? So it's not going to happen the old-fashioned way. And it has to be, it has to move into the realm of, and if you look at all of them, I don't have infrastructure here, right? If you look at all of them are information problems. Right? There is no reason it should cost 10 trillion. If you're successful, it will happen. India will pull this off with less than 100 billion, right? India's budget is $250 billion. So we're getting close to the point. Within 10 years, we'll be able to afford 100 billion for these services, right? We're not there yet. But I think we are converging, right? But the problem is today it costs $10 trillion. Our problem is, our objective is to crash the price factor of 100. So now let me jump into examples of how you can do that, right? And of course, anytime you build a platform, you build it using design principles. Pramod may or may not have talked about it. I was not there for the whole talk, but underlying each of the India stack pieces we have built, there are design principles that you begin with, right? So one example I'll start with is MapMaker. I did not begin this inside the construct of digital public goods, but the idea was the same. Can we create maps for the world? When I was sent by Google to start the Indian office in 2003, right? And Larry and Sergey, in those days Google was less than 1,000 people, less than 200 engineers. So Larry and Sergey said, go and figure out problems that are inspired by places like India and build it for the whole world, right? And when I came, I'm spatially challenged. I cannot find my way. So the first problem that occurred to me was maps. And I had happened to have read a book by Hernando de Soto, who said that if you have maps and property loss, good quality property loss, development automatically happens because large amount of capital gets unlocked. I said, okay, internet users need maps, development needs maps, we will build maps. And the problem was, in those days, the cost of building maps, I'm coming to this information, this story will be consistent, the pattern. The cost of building maps in those days was roughly $15 per kilometer. You had to fly a GPS truck or put it on a ship, bring it to India, drive it around the roads, and it cost you $10 to $15 a kilometer. And the cost of adding a point of interest was roughly anywhere from $3 to $5, right? And India was 3 million kilometers plus a few million points, $100 million. For context, in those days, we as in Google was paying, I think, $3 or $5 million for US maps per year. So nobody was going to fork over $100 million. So I actually talked to my friends in Microsoft and Yahoo in those days. Those were the 3 big internet companies, and asked them, hey, can we collaborate? And we pooled together the money, and our headquarters said, no, not going to happen. Then it struck me that and India was supposed to be the fastest growing market outside of the US, right? If India cannot afford it, the most of the world definitely cannot afford maps. So what do we do? And I was standing in the office looking at the road with thousands of people walking, and I realized if there are 4,000 people on this road, you allow people to map, somebody will map it and the world will get mapped, right? So this was the world map in 2004 when we started. When the first line of code was written, the world map looked like this, right? And had a simple idea. Make it crowdsourced, allow people to map. There is this obscure piece of mathematics called computational geometry that I had to bring to life, and create this sparse learning system which we packaged into a trust system to figure out, because if everybody starts mapping, people will do mischief, people will make mistakes. How do you fix the mistakes, and so on. So, is a question? No. Okay. And then crowd disseminated. So basically the idea was give the control to people. You build the technology and let people do what they do, and make it all real time so people see it happen while they're doing it and they have fun. Can you play the video? So I'm going to give an example. This video will continue playing a couple of times. I'll walk through this. We launched it, and whenever we launched a city, we would launch it with a few main roads drawn, and this is a time lapse roughly over 3 months, right? Let it play again so you can watch it again. Right, so this is what we started with, and then within 3 months, the city of the city is Madurai, in Tamil Nadu. It's a very well-known temple city, and this got mapped within 3 months. And you have to realize this was 2008 with very poor internet connections. Only people in Indian cities had internet, only from their desktops, no mobiles and so on, but it still worked. And this story was repeated across roughly 10,000 towns and cities in India, and then rural India, and can we, yeah. And then the rest of the world. So roughly 190 countries that you see on Google Maps. I don't know if any of you ever knew that this is how it was done. This is how it was done. If you're using Google Maps today, those maps came to life in roughly 190 countries from 2008 to 2011. And after that, we started launching MapMaker in the developed countries because people realized that even the so-called developed country maps were incomplete. So by 2014, MapMaker was launched in the entire world, I think with the exception of Russia, not surprising. So, and the interesting part was the technology was easy. I mean, it's not obvious, but if you put 10 bright computer scientists together, this happened. I mean, the first version of this was written by me and Sanjay Jain, who later joined Aadhaar, right? But the interesting thing was it is a story of the people, not a story of technology, right? And the other interesting thing about platforms is when you build a platform and you make it open, people start doing amazingly interesting things about it, things you do not expect, right? So the first use case of MapMaker outside of mapping was Ushahidi, right? Born in Kenya. There is this woman, Julia, who approached, I mean, I didn't know her. She approached the African Google team and said, I want to use this to map violence and atrocities against women. And it turns out that violence and atrocities against women is not a Kenyan thing, it's a global thing, right? And when she started it, it started in Kenya. It was another same story. It was started in Kenya, inspired by women of Kenya, but then spread across the world. I mean, the people in India and Japan using it still today, right? And George Clooney decided to do something about Sudan. When Sudan was succeeding into two countries, there was another succession that happened 10-15 years ago where several 100,000 people died. And the interesting thing was, this is his map, by the way. They used MapMaker hybrid version to do that. And the interesting insight he had was people, and I was in the US when that happened, when the atrocities were happening in Africa, and people in the US were like, this is not our problem. We don't know, we have nothing to do about it, even though all the money was coming from the US, right? And Clooney said, I'm not going to let this happen. People cannot say we didn't know. So he said, we will map it. And it interestingly turns out that if you actually map it and make it transparent, the administration of Sudan was able to do something about it. And the Sudanese government later said that what George Clooney did allowed them to make it a far more peaceful transition than it would have been otherwise, right? And the third one was disaster management, right? So one of the things that happened is maps are very important for disaster management. When floods happen, earthquakes happen, and so on, they are very useful. And you cannot do it after the fact. You cannot wake up and say, I want to map this country after a disaster happens. It has to be ready ahead of time. So somewhere around 2009, late 2009, the UN approached us, and we collaborated with them. We gave them the vector maps which they needed. And then 2010, the floods of Pakistan happened. Right, the first large flooding of Pakistan in modern history happened. And to give you a sense of the extent of it, 20% of the country was underwater, 10% of the population was displaced, 18 million people, right? And when we asked them to do the analysis, the military did the analysis and came back and gave us this nice letter, which told us that roughly 800,000 people had been given help because of the maps, because they were not findable without the maps, and of those 230,000 people's lives have been saved, more or less, right? And the interesting thing was, all of this was done by users of Pakistan. It's nothing to do with, I mean, MapMaker played a very small role in this. I still remember, I mean, interestingly, Pakistan was the first country we launched on MapMaker. It was not India. It was Pakistan, Philippines, Vietnam, and so on and so on. And the reason why is the Indian regulators are so cautious that they didn't let us launch. They said it's illegal to map in India. Um, and uh, and when it was launching, I had my Pakistani colleague, a guy called Zia, who used to pester me, when are we launching maps in Pakistan? And the day before it launched, he sent messages to all his friends across the US, UK, and Lahore and Karachi, which is where the internet was in Pakistan those days. And they spent the next year mapping Pakistan to a level of detail that probably no other country had been mapped at that time in the global south. So Pakistan was actually better mapped than India for a while. And these photographs are the photographs of the expert mappers, power mappers from across Asia. We had an Asian conference late 2009, and the gentleman whose photograph is lit up um, is why I have titled the talk the way I have. His name is Mr. C.N.R. Nair. He spent 4 years, starting in 2008 all the way to 2012, mapping rural Kerala. Rural Kerala became the first rural area in India, probably the emerging world, where every village and every small hamlet was completely mapped because of his effort. He said, I want rural Kerala mapped, and inspired by him, rest of the rural world started getting mapped. And what he didn't tell, and we knew that he was one of our heroes, so we would call him to these user meetings and he would come and talk to us. What we did not know, that he was suffering with cancer during this time. And this was his last contribution to the planet before he left. So he gathered a whole bunch of young students and young people, and together they mapped rural Kerala. Right? And to give you a sense of why this project was difficult, the technical part to me was not that hard. There was no belief this would succeed. So the leadership inside Google, with the exception of Larry, Sergey, and Eric, and two more people. One of them was my manager, and the other one was the head of engineering. Other than those 5, none of the leadership of Google believed this would work. They said, I don't know if you know this, but GIS requires, I mean, there's actually a degree in GIS in IIIT, right? It takes 4 years for you to learn how to do mapping. It takes you 4 years. What makes you think a 10th standard or a 10th grade child who is sitting with the internet connection can actually map, right? So technically it is not feasible. The second thing that they didn't believe was people would actually do it, that people care, right? So sitting in Mountain View, everything is about transaction and money and contracts. People don't believe that people will do something for each other just out of their goodwill and for the sense of community. And growing up in India, that was obvious, so I had an advantage. And the third thing they didn't believe was that people would do it with high quality, right? The interesting thing is maps needs to be 98% quality. To give you a sense of quality, Wikipedia has an accuracy. If you evaluate Wikipedia, it has an accuracy of about 60%. The links in Wikipedia have an accuracy of 30%, right? Many of the links are spam. That is why many of the high traffic pages are locked down. You can't edit them, right? And given that, how are you going to get to 98% accuracy, right? And if you look at one of the principles I had outlined, I said community sourced and community curated. So we even left the moderation to the community. We said we trust our people. We are not going to, because there is no way I'm going to know how to map in Africa or how to map in Pakistan or how to map, how to map in rural Kerala, let alone, rest of India, right? Me sitting in Bangalore, I have no idea. Right? And so long story short, this project inside was cancelled 6 times, right? And because I was doing something that, in corporations, as many of you know, if you do something your bosses tell you not to do, you get fired. So they tried to fire me 3 times, and Larry and Sergey had to stop them each of those times. And the sense I did it with was, Martin Luther King's quote. He said at some point that God does not give you a vision without giving you the strength to fulfill it. And the reason I am, surfacing this story is some of you will be sitting in this minority of one, thinking something is possible, and nobody else believes you around it. Maybe one or two of you, right? You see something is possible, and nobody else believes it. And that's when you need to remind yourself that people better than us, greater than us, have said so, and maybe we can believe them, even if we don't believe ourselves in that moment. Because when everybody you know, and many people you respect tell you that you don't have no idea what you're doing, it's very easy to give up, right? But that is the small sacrifice we have to make, because our users, the people that we are trying to do this for, make sacrifices every day in far greater magnitude than we ever will, right? And to give you a sense of the story, when I met Nandan when he was building Aadhaar, I won't name names, but he would walk me through the difficulties he was facing building and rolling out Aadhaar, and none of those difficulties were technical difficulties. He had people like Pramod and Sanjay and Vivek and so on. He had amazing technical firepower. So the technical problems they had solved. The operational problems that he was struggling with, which I came to know later, and he was too nice a gentleman to tell me what those were. I found out from other people around him, is that they would try to stop him. And later on, he confided that they not just stop him, there were people with very, very high ranks in the government at that time who were not trying to slow it down, they were trying to kill it, almost on a daily basis, right? And what Nandan had to do was to, eat his own ego. I mean, he had no reason to do this, right? He had no reason to leave the chairmanship of what was arguably India's greatest company, right? Probably on par with the Tatas, right? And then leave that job and work with a team, spending his own money because the government did not give money initially, right? And do this and eat crow every day and go and talk to people who were far more junior than him and say, please, 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 right? And so what I submit to you is, if Nandan had to do it, if anyone is going to do global change or population scale change, we will have to do the same thing. So now I'll quickly walk you through a couple of my other journeys after that. So 2014, I realized that whatever I could do inside Google to make a difference for people, I had done. So I left. And then started working with Pramod, Sanjay, Sharad, and others on what was in those days we used to call India Stack. Right now it's called DPI, I think. And worked on something called the Open API. Wrote the policy for the Open API. Many of the pieces you see have the underlying infrastructure called Open API. Help with UPI 2.0, eSign, GST, and so on. So when COVID happened, people remembered that, I know something about technology. So the Ministry of Information and Electronics called me, I think roughly March 15th, and said, we are going to announce a nationwide lockdown in 6 days, 6 days or 7 days. And by end of March, we want to build and launch India's digital response to COVID, because we don't know how to reach help to 1 billion people. And I said, look, I'm pretty fast at building technology, but it's not going to happen in 10 days, right? But I was wrong. So we built it and launched it, and Arogya Setu did 3 things. It allowed people to report symptoms and ask for help, because we didn't have the health infrastructure to reach people. People had to reach us, reach the government. And people could also, we had Bluetooth tracing, so we could find out who was at risk. And interestingly, through all of that, we also did a little bit of computer science, where we started tracking and doing machine learning based on the symptoms that people were reporting and locations of people where they had been when they got infected. And we started predicting where COVID would appear before it appeared. So roughly, India had an advantage of 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks. The officials on the ground, this was never public. Now we are talking about it because COVID is over. The officials on the ground knew that a infection hotspot would appear. Each dot is the size of a cell tower, roughly 2 to 3 weeks before it happened. So this was a collaboration I did with Professor Kamakoti, who is the director of IIT Madras, and Professor Bharadwaj, who is a computer scientist from Indian Institute of Science. Right? Very simple machine learning on top of the symptoms that people were submitting. And this was map of India during wave 2. Nothing, that was too late, nothing we could do when that happened. And the interesting thing was, it is like every other platform, it has multiple users. So Arogya Setu was voluntary because it was people's health data. Phone number was the ID. And then we took the infrastructure of Arogya Setu, the underlying infrastructure, married Aadhaar to it, and another team took it over, and it became CoWIN, right? And just to give a sense of the numbers, Arogya Setu reached 200 million users within 3 months. I think it reached 50 million people within 10 days. And then the Prime Minister spoke about it, and the graph went like this, right? And Aadhaar is a billion people. And CoWIN, as many of you know, 800 million people got vaccines using a digital traceable vaccine system. The most interesting part about CoWIN to me was not the fact that you had a digital vaccine record tied to your Aadhaar numbers. The most interesting part was the speed at which we could deploy vaccines. So what is not widely known is that when you got a vaccine using CoWIN, we knew actually which batch of vaccine you got the vaccination from. So if a particular vaccination batch had been mishandled, for example, it was not kept at the right temperature, or there was something wrong with it, people would get a second dose or a third dose, because we knew who had gotten that bad batch of vaccines. So that allowed India to roll out vaccinations much, much faster than would have been otherwise, because we had digital traceability in each batch of vaccines. So like Pramod said, once you build digital public layers, some of us decided we will build private layers on top, because not everything can be done by the government. So one of the missions that's incomplete is Aadhaar and UPI and banking is supposed to make an account aggregator, which you will hear about, or have people already heard about? Yeah. Account aggregator together should allow you to make lending easier and allow everybody to get included in the lending facility. The problem is bootstrapping. We have roughly 100 million families who have never gotten a loan in this country. They all have loans, but not from a bank. They have loans from money lenders, local money lenders, who charge them anywhere from 50% to 100% interest per year, right? And so it's not going to solve by itself, because account aggregator and all of that work when you have some digital data. When you have no digital data, there's nothing you can do, right? So we decided to solve the problem in another way using the same crowdsourcing principles. We said if the community knows who is safe, who is worthy of a loan. So if you combine the community along with a digital system we built for loans, it is possible to provide loans to everybody. It's an experiment, right? We started very small. This slide is roughly 3 years old, and this slide is a few days old. So this is where we have arrived today. Long story short, I won't go into that. That's an entire story by itself. Happy to talk about it separately. We just hit 500,000 users, right? And it's now starting to hit exponential scale. So we took 4 years to get to, roughly 3 to 4 years to get to 250,000 users. The last 250,000 users happened in the last 6 months, right? If I give this talk roughly a year later, all these numbers would have doubled. We are roughly doubling every 12 months, right? And the way we did it is we crowdsourced. One of the secret sauces is we crowdsourced loan products. So if you go to a bank, India's largest private bank, HDFC, has 30 loan products. Why? Because the top 50, 100 million of us, I call us California Indians, we all have the same needs. We all have monthly salaries. And if you have monthly salary, you don't need many loan products. You have the same loan product, the amount of loan varies, and maybe you have a moratorium, and then you have different hypothecation, and you're done, right? But the problem is the people beyond the first 50 million families, the rest of India does not have predictable income. Their income varies. The people know what their income variation is, but their income varies. So when their income varies, the loan product, a good loan product would have a EMI or a repayment flow matching their income flow, right? And sitting in Bangalore or Bombay, which is where these operations are, we don't know what those income flows are, right? Our users do. So we allowed our communities to create these loan products. So our communities created 200 loan products. And I think probably by next year, we will probably have 500 loan products. So every new community has its own needs, right? And right? So the idea is composable computing. So what we are doing is some of us are, if another batch of computer scientists um, are creating this new platform called composable computing, where computing itself is managed by the community, right? It has to be hyper agile, very low cost, and composable. And the whole Avanti, finance platform is a first instantiation of this idea, right? And if you do that, we can light up communities to self-organize, self-transact, and scale, right? So the whole principle is you build a very thin layer, you build the infrastructure for the community, and the community takes over. It's very, very similar to the MAPS idea, very, very similar to the Arogya Setu idea. We provide a very small amount of computer science, make it open scalable, and the community takes over, right? And what they do with it, we can't even imagine, right? So there are two companies involved in that, and like you were asking, right? Now, the next wave of India's evolution in DPI will not be the multinationals building a payment system. Like, for example, Google built GPay and Flipkart, and which Walmart has PhonePe and so on, and they have these payment apps. Those are very lightweight innovation. Now we need to have deep technology innovations because AI and community has to come into the picture, right? And some of us are starting to build those, right? So our goal is to bring an end to poverty, subsidizing the world. If you look very closely at the history of the industrial age, and before that the colonial age, and before that the agricultural age, history of civilization has been a history of the poor subsidizing the rich, not the other way around, right? And it is possible by, and the reason is parity of information was missing, right? It's all that is. If you look very closely, it's all it is. Parity of information has been missing. If all of us have digital identities, and if you know exactly who is trustworthy in a village or not, they will get 10% loans at 10% interest rate, not 50% or 100%, right? And they will get high quality healthcare because the money is there. The healthcare is not reaching them. It is just getting trapped by people along the way, and education and so on and so forth. So this is a Indian song written around the same time that We Shall Overcome Someday was written. And it says, we, as in the people of this world, will be the best. And I added one more line of my own that, and it was like, we will be the best someday. And I think with digital, we can get to be, our people can be the best in the world in this generation. So with that, I'll stop. Any questions?
I understood you as a technical, capable, very capable personality, at the same time being a very visionary, very spiritual personality in some context, because you here brought up the mindset and light up about the idea of service orientation, or to make a contribution not to our country or one nation, but to a whole world. It's such a great vision, and it's wonderful. The way you have been enlightening us through this presentation is amazing. So my question to you is about our country. We are from Sri Lanka, and at this moment we are passing a very adverse time.
Yeah.
Because it's not that people are bad or our politicians are bad. It's just that we are passing a dark time. And for us the challenge for us is to bring the light, especially this digital public infrastructure could help us and help us light the points that you have highlighted. In your opinion, perhaps you know little about the Sri Lankan context. In your opinion, what should we do as the professionals, as some people who are responsible for digital transformation in Sri Lanka, to light up the nation and to take them back to the track? What is your view?
So I think first I want to thank you for your kind words. I give all the credit to my parents, teachers, and I don't think I'm a visionary. I'm just a stubborn engineer, right? And I cherish the stubbornness that I have. And I think I have some context of Sri Lanka, right? And in many ways, the crisis you have, like the Chinese used to say, or ancient Chinese saying, is an opportunity. I don't know if you know India's history, but India hit a similar crisis point in 1990, right? Where we had balance of payment crisis. It's famously known as the balance of payment crisis. India was on the edge of bankruptcy within, I think, 2 weeks, come here? Yeah, we had 2 weeks of money left. And it's a horrible thing to say, but the nice thing about a crisis is people will let you do revolutionary things. So I think as professionals of Sri Lanka, what exactly those are, you will do, and you can of course ask us and we will provide advice, but you have to decide because you know Sri Lanka better than any one of us. But as the decision makers and the professionals of Sri Lanka, can now use this crisis to make a very large leap, which India cannot do today. If India wanted to make a revolutionary leap, it's not like India is perfect, right? I can make a list of problems. If me and Kamya sat down, we will make a list of problems about 20, 30 long. Each of them is a major problem, right? If you just take UPI, if you put me and Pramod into a room, we will write the next 10 things that need to happen in UPI that have not happened. Not that we have not tried, they're not happened, right? But India cannot make a leap because India is now a successful growing economy. So we can make large steps, unlike the West, but our steps will be much smaller than the steps you can take, right? And digital allows you to grow much faster than any of the previous era or previous revolutions could, right? So that would, I'll give you a simple example. I don't think this is very widely known in the world, but the last Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was the finance minister when the balance of payment crisis happened, right? And he went to the Prime Minister, Mr. Vajpayee, with a set of recommendations. And the Prime Minister said, look, we have a fire burning. You need to go much further. Come back with a much bolder proposal. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, he's a Harvard trained economist, he's a Harvard trained economist. He's cautious by nature, right? He doesn't want to, create a lot of trouble for the political establishment. So he came back with a next evolution. And the Prime Minister said, try again, right? I'm giving you a blank check. Do everything you can do to fix the Indian economy right now so that for the next 30 years, we don't have to worry about it. And Dr. Manmohan Singh, of course, did. He knew what to do. He was just being cautious, right? And I think you have to throw caution into the winds, right? And I wish, actually, I don't mean India cannot because it's the wrong time for India to do it. I think India should also throw caution into the wind because in the AI era, in the automation era we are in, right, we cannot be slow because there is a very serious danger of digital colonization of the whole world by the haves and have-nots, right? My advisor at Carnegie Mellon warned me about this when I trained in AI in 1994, right? He warned me that this era is coming, so which is what made me move back to India. But I think you have to throw caution into the winds and take very large, bold steps. And what those are, we can discuss.
Lalithesh, thank you very much for the inspiring presentation. I come from Nepal. I'm an entrepreneur, so on many occasions, and I did the ride sharing, so maps, it was right there. I just wanted to follow up with one of your presentation slides where you talked about the 8 billion people and AI, right? And it so is happening that during the Industrial Revolution, human beings, we've translated the energy of our limbs to machines.
Yeah.
So our physical skills were replaced, right? As we come to 2020, 2023, 24, it is very likely that our cognitive skills are going to be replaced by machines. And in the context of India and countries like ours, where we have a large number of youth. Um, how do you think, with so many jobs that could be taken away with AI, how do you think that that challenge could be navigated in a country like Nepal and India and South Asia, which could be totally different to the Western world?
Yeah.
So, I just wanted your vision as to what you aspire to do. I'm sure you've thought of that, and maybe you're already working on this particular thing.
Yeah. So I don't think the Industrial Revolution it partly replaced, human limbs or human motive power with machines and animal motive power with machines. But the interesting thing was the Industrial Revolution was also an era of, military expansion and operation, right? I mean, these clothes I'm wearing, right? There is no reason these clothes should be as inexpensive as they are. If the person who had to, and if you remember, if you know, Industrial Revolution did not replace all physical work. Some physical work could not be replaced. And that physical work starting in the 60s and 70s started being shipped to this part of the world, right? So people in the West could be freed from that. But what they did is they did not pay fair wage for that physical work, right? So there was no reason, food which was grown, and a lot of the food is actually grown in this part of the world and gets shipped elsewhere, right? Food should be so cheap, because the only reason food is so cheap is because the farmer is starving. Only because the farmer is on the verge of destitution is, why food is cheap, right? If the farmer got paid a fair wage and you got rid of some of the intermediate layers in between, food would be a little bit more expensive, not exorbitantly more, but the world would be a better place. And similarly, if the person who, helped sew these shoes or sew these clothes was paid a fair wage, right? We would pay a little bit more for clothes, probably buy fewer shirts, which is probably better for the planet, right? Carbon footprint would be lower, and people would be better off. So I think, we need to start getting very, very clear about policy. In the industrial era, most of the beginning of the industrial era, we didn't have agency. We as in nations did not have control over our own destiny. We could not decide the prices of goods and services we provided. Because in many ways, post-colonial era, we were left at the mercy of the establishment being the UN and the World Bank and so on and so forth. Some of it is still there, right? So I think we need to rewrite rules a little bit, right? That will take some collective power, which I think is starting to emerge. That is one, and the other one is actually learn from history. So as we go into the automation era, we learn from history. Not all cognitive work will be replaced, right? And we need to start valuing the cognitive parts that is not replaced, and not fight the parts that are going to be replaced. Because if you fight the jobs that are anyway going to disappear, all you will do is, you'll be, chasing a falling knife, right? It's not going to work. To give you a specific answer, my answer for how, for example, we will have a sane world, I think there are three parts. One is we need to have universal basic income. There is no choice around it. But to have universal basic income, we need revenues. The country needs revenues, right? And does everybody know who Jensen Huang is? The founder of NVIDIA, which is leading the AI revolution right now. He was in Bangalore a few weeks back, and he said, don't export data, export AI, right? And if you look very closely, a lot of the AI is actually being built using data and people from this part of the world, right? And you probably don't realize it, but there are people in Nepal capturing Nepalese voices right now, right? So we have to be very clear about making sure that we are the revenue of AI and automation era is proportionally distributed across all of our countries. If you do that, there'll be enough money to create a universal basic income. It will not be enough to thrive, but the thriving will come from using our own natural resources and turning those into products in our own countries, right? India is probably one of the world's largest arable. India as a country has the largest arable land on the planet, right? So increasingly, we're going to produce a lot of agricultural goods. So instead of exporting rice, we should export processed agricultural goods, right? And Africa is the source of most of the minerals that are going to be powering the AI revolution. Lithium, cobalt, and so on and so forth, right? If I were in Africa's shoes, I would say we will export batteries, we will not export cobalt or whatever the mineral is that you have, right? And the other source of the economy is going to be, so one is natural resources. So when I look at India, I look at India as, you know, roughly 130 million farmers and 70 million small and micro entrepreneurs. And of course, every country has small and micro entrepreneurs. So employment will come from these 170 million farmers thriving and employing one or two of their neighbors, and these 70 million entrepreneurs employing 3 or 4 people each, right? The era where factories employed people is gone. Our policymakers will keep saying it, but we should stop saying it when we are actually doing deep thinking, because that, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, by the time any policy you create comes to life, those jobs are gone, right? And you will have very high quality jobs. You will have chip designers, and you'll have, you know, high quality doctors and, you know, entrepreneurs and so on. So education becomes very important. But so that is my answer, right? Focus on the small and micro entrepreneur. Focus on the people who are in charge of your resources. Turn your resources into products. Don't export resources. Thank you.